Hello, we are back to regular scheduling this week. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Benny Matthews. This is obviously the Dose of Benny podcast. And we're going to cover off a little bit more of research-based topics today. Nothing that's going to get too into the weeds, so don't stress if you don't come from a scientific background or if that sort of stuff sends you a little bit nutty. I just want to sort of touch on some physiological differences between preparing for a road marathon versus ultramarathons, what we actually know within the literature and how that's informing how we go about coaching those actual events themselves. And then also some of the roadblocks that we're starting to run into now in the field itself, just around terminology. So the word durability has sort of been thrown into the fray as a definition now, to which we help sort of model certain characteristics that are either going to help or harm you during an ultramarathon. And then on top of that, also sort of just want to extend my thoughts on the Cape to Cape now that I've sort of returned to regular life, regular coaching, and where my positioning is on what to do next. It's a question I get a lot, and sometimes it is a little bit frustrating, because I think it just shows where a lot of people anchor themselves in. It's like, well, I've always got to be doing something next. What's my focus? What's my focus? What's my focus? And that's great, but sometimes I don't think we spend enough time in reflection, just connecting with that why question. Why am I doing this? And those that I respect a lot in the space across the world, I feel are constantly reflecting. They're sitting in their thoughts and their feelings, as well as the objective data that is available to you post-race, whether it's like heart rate stuff or nutrition and things like that. So there's a few things that are still crossing my mind with respect to races that are not too far away. But we'll get into that. But yeah, first I sort of wanted to go over some papers, some research that's out there discussing the differences between road marathons and ultramarathons. So in case you're not familiar with some of the literature and basically where we form a lot of our knowledge on how to prepare, not only personally, but how to prepare clients for these races. So for a road marathon, we know so much about the physiology that is required and how to train for this 2 to 3 and obviously up to 5 hours plus event now. But like if we're talking from the world best, so around that 2 hour 15 is that world's best. So I guess take it 2 to 2.5 hours. We know that using Joyner's model for that, so that was sort of created back in the 90s by researcher Joyner, and the 3 pillars are VO2 max, lactate threshold, and running economy. So you can train all those 3 variables, and that third one, the economy piece, it is affected by like your genetics to a large degree as well, but it is also highly trainable. So the running economy piece just means that you're able to utilize oxygen and energy far greater than an individual at the same pace. So you would know that from running with friends. You're going to have fitter friends. So you try and hold pace with them, they're going to drop you. You're going to have friends that are less fit than you, holding the same pace, you'd eventually drop them. So that is essentially running economy. Where things start to differ in the ultra running space is we don't really know what the true physiological underpinnings are to make the world's greatest ultramarathoner. We're starting to uncover that now, and I think now that we've entered the world of high carb fueling, and I think just seeing so many course records falling across the world in the last, let's say 2 years now, you're seeing a lot of nutrition companies coming in and actually recording their data, be it carb intake, sodium intake, and fluid intake. And I think now that we're starting to garner a lot of this information, starting to get really good ideas on things that are helping support the duration of these events. And when you've got a race like the Western States endurance race that's coming up in a couple of weeks now in California, that is like the F1 of ultramarathons, of 100 milers, I should say. The fact that the course record is just over 14 hours, held by Walmsley, is just mind-boggling. You know, like, you're considered quite an established runner if you can go sub 24 hours. So the fact that these guys are going 10 hours quicker than that, it's almost beyond belief of what they're actually putting themselves through physically. But I think it also proves that now we've really pushed that needle further along, that perhaps a lot of the physiological underpinnings of the elite 100 milers is maybe closer to the road marathon than we realized, or more so perhaps we are getting a greater understanding of the next set of variables, be it environmental factors, heat stress, being able to prepare for heat. We're getting a lot greater understanding of how to prepare for those. So now you're not only seeing like passive heat strategies such as sauna, hot tub, but then also on the other side of that, how to keep yourself cool in these hot climates. So you've got all your ice bandanas, all the topical cooling, which is perfect for those drier environments. Not so good here in southeast Queensland, where it is god awfully humid all the time. So, you know, trying to just douse yourself in ice water, you're just going to create this beautiful sheath that is akin to just sweating and humidity already, which will actually insulate you more and increase your core body temp. So not so good here. But we're getting a greater understanding of those. But then it gets tricky because the external factors, like probably more internal, is like the psychological factors. You know, what are your motivations for being out there? How do you deal with adversity? What is your decision making like under fatigue? And these start to compound even more once you go beyond that 100-mile distance. But I really feel like the 100-mile distance is still the gateway. So that's where it's difficult, because we get stuck with definitions, you know. So ultramarathon is simply anything that exceeds a 42.2K marathon. So where does that leave us? Because now we're talking about a 50K, 100K, 100 mile, 200 mile, and a 200 mile is now a multi-day. Then you've got backyard ultras, which is a different format because there's elements of forced rest, you know, so there's strategy. And then you've got the psychological factors because the person who wins it needs second place to be able to come along with them so that they can push records and stuff like that. So you can see, I hope you can tell the way that I'm talking, like it's very, very fascinating and an exciting place to be in, but it is also extremely difficult to be able to sort of quantify certain variables that we can underpin in a research setting. So getting to like specific papers, there's a paper back in 2021 by Coates and colleagues called Physiological Determinants of Ultramarathon Trail Running Performance. And essentially they monitored, it was 51 competitors at multiple different race distances from 50K, 50 mile to 100 mile. And they did a whole testing battery looking at all sorts of different like physiological variables from like resting heart rate, blood pressure. They did like volitional fatigue tests prior to the races and took a whole heap of different like blood markers, blah, 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 blah. And I think even this paper is a good example of how even just calling ultramarathons anything from basically 50K and onwards even becomes problematic. Because essentially what they found was that VO2 max was still somewhat, it was just only a little bit beyond a marathon distance. So even despite the fact that there's environmental factors of elevation gain and loss, because it's a trail ultramarathon, they still led to predictive outcomes of performance, finishes, winners and stuff like that. But then essentially once it got to the 100 miler, it offered up nothing. There was nothing that they could really determine that was like, oh, this is why this person won, why these performers were at the top, and then why these guys finished last. I think the only information that is quite useful when it comes to a bit more generalized training approach is looking at the data from those that didn't finish. So of the 51 who started the race, and this is across all distances, so they only had 51 competitors across the 50K, the 50 mile and 100 mile, 9 non-finishers. So I think it was 2 or 3 in the 50, so everyone in the 50K finished. There was a couple in the 50 mile that didn't finish, and then the rest, like the 6 or 7, were in the 100 mile. But the interesting factors that sort of stood out were the training volume that was used. So the running time in the last month in hours per week, you had for the 50K was 7.9 hours on average, 8.2 for the 50 mile and 8.6 for the 100 mile. And of the non-finishers, average hours was only 6.3. So a really big decrement there. And then obviously that leads to a difference in training volume in kilometers per week. So you had 66 Ks for the 50K runners, 87 for the 50 mile and 88 for the 100 mile. And the non-finishers was only 51. And then running volume in the last year, you had 54, 56, 72 and only 36 for the non-finishers. So I think that paints a really, really good picture of one, if you aren't putting, like volume does matter to a certain degree, right? I know I often preach here with my modalities and my methodologies that I'm sort of anchored in strength, and particularly in a trail running context, I feel like that buys me a lot of space to be able to still push quite well. And it's probably got me to a point now in reflection of being able to complete these things. But now am I at a point where I have to tweak my methodology because I've now DNF'd a 100 miler trying to push a little harder. So this is the evolution of my own performance. I've gone from that complete to compete. And we'll get on to, I think, some varying definitions and how we can look to define those two terms in a little bit as well. But I want to stay on course here and say that, yeah, like total training volume does obviously matter, just as it does in a strength training context. Like if you're only lifting, high intensity and you're not building enough volume in the gym for certain periods of time and lowering that intensity, then you will start to plateau with your adaptations, as we touched on a lot in last week's podcast in the strength training world. So that was the biggest thing that leapt out for me, is that there is clearly a certain amount of training volume that you need. And then the other interesting number that jumped out in the differences between all those that did finish the race was the average volume in the last year. And the 50K and 50 mile runners were pretty much the same. So 54 and 56 Ks on average per week, whereas the 100 milers were running 72. So I think that's quite indicative of what you'd see in a lot of these events across the world. Like most people that are doing a 50K, there's going to be a lot of first timers there. So they would generally go through just like a prep for it. It might not be something that they, like running isn't something that they do all the time. It's quite phasic and they're just, okay, cool. I'm going to put in like 10 to 16 weeks, get this 50K done, then it's done. And then there might be like a cessation. Like I see that with clients, like they just like want a break. It takes a lot of time and effort to do these things. And if it isn't your passion and you aren't getting paid to do it, reconnecting with that why, as I've already touched on, is a very important thing. And for some people, that why isn't big enough and they'll have bouts where they just disconnect for a while. And I think that's what you'll see is the biggest difference between those that sort of want to tackle the 100 miler and below. Whereas we talk about the 100 mile sort of being the gateway. So I think the term ultramarathon is even somewhat limiting from 50K to 100 mile. Like that is such a big step up. Even 50 to 100K, like you're doubling that. Like that alone is crazy. So I can't even imagine like how exponential that continues to feel when you scale that out for all these crazy race distances that keep popping up all across the world. So I think it's just a good example that those that do well and are consistently sort of tackling these 100-mile events are doing so through consistency of year-round training. And that's something that's definitely changed for me personally. And those numbers are quite interesting to see, because I would say I was closer to the 50K and 80Ks average when I was sort of floating around the 50 to 100K. And now that I got through my first 100 miler, but now that I was pushing for Cape to Cape this year, I've definitely increased that a lot more, and that average has come up a lot. That it's a lot more indicative of what we see in the research. And obviously the limitations here, I think it's quite ironic that you have the title of physiological determinants of ultra marathon trail running performance, and we don't really come up with any for the 100 mile. So unfortunately, again, these shorter things seem to have a lot more controlled variables, and that is always going to be the hardest thing moving forward. One thing I think I would love to see is more events actually delivering their own questionnaire after the race. And I think if we could create a big database of where these races are actually collecting, and it obviously doesn't have to be compulsory, it's just something that you send out as a questionnaire after your race, you're not always going to get upfront answers, because some people aren't tracking certain things. Like if you ask, what was your average carbs per hour? Like some people aren't going to be tracking that. They're not going to know. They could be crewing themselves, like that's going to be difficult. But I'm sure there's certain things that you could get an understanding of that would actually provide massive benefit. And I think even if it wasn't completely accurate, you would start to see some trends start to expose themselves. And I think that is a massive part of the trail running and ultra running community that we need to continue, is that coaching, whether it be principles and how we are preparing our athletes for these events, and also those that are taking part in these races, need to continue to share their story. And I think that's what a lot of our elites do relatively well in the ultra running space and trail running space, is sharing their experiences and what they're doing for training. There's not too many that are too tight-lipped. We're seeing, a heap of guys jumping on YouTube now and doing these vlogs, and these brands are getting behind these athletes and help putting these little stories and videos out there. I think it's awesome, because all of a sudden we can start to practice a lot of these theories and see what sticks. Obviously things have changed a lot with the high carb movement. It's probably more in my space because I digest a lot, through David and Megan Roach. I love a lot of their content, I practice a lot of their stuff, use a lot of their training plans, and they've influenced me a lot over the last sort of 8 to 9 months in my own training, and then the experimentations that I've been having with my clients based on how serious or not serious those clients are about their race. And I think if we continue these opportunities to share our experience, like I'm trying to do here in this context, is we can have some back and forth, we can have some dialogue. I don't think we need to get bogged down in this area of I'm right, you're wrong, this is a fucking stupid idea, anything like that. It's the acceptance that we can actually help not only ourselves now in real time, but in generations to come. The more information that we are putting out there about what's working and what's not working, what is context specific, like there's so much nuance, not only like we've already discussed in the difference between a 50K to a 100 miler to a 200 miler to a backyard ultra, but also like the difference in courses. Like that is something that, having now experienced running on the other side of the country, just don't get conditions like that here on the East Coast. So it's given me a whole heap of appreciation, and honestly, I guess of fear, like a healthy fear for the distance. And if you're going to put this effort in, you really do need to be trying to train in that environment as best you can. And I think replicating something that's not in the same environment, it's probably akin to my old world of coaching rugby league players. And you would always, have a massive preseason. These guys are fit, they're strong, they're powerful. You can do all the opposed sessions you want in the world, meaning that it's like in-house. So you're having game-like scenarios with other teammates. You're not playing against anyone. You can do all the contact you want, but until you get out there and start your trial matches, nothing truly replicates that game intensity like playing the game. And I don't think you can truly replicate what is required of you on a given course until you're out there. I think there is a small population, and they are going to be the best runners in the world, that can get on a new course and do very, very well. And we need to continue to monitor what those people are doing and see if we can try and unlock what it is that they are providing and see what is applicable to those of us that aren't ever going to be the best in the world. So yeah, I think it's frustrating. Like, there is research out there, but again, how do we go about quantifying those things? That's the difficult part. And that sort of leads me on to the next thing. So there's terms now that have come out recently. It's defined as durability. Call it like fatigue resistance is the term that I use a lot when I'm talking to my athletes about what we're trying to achieve. But again, this paper, and Joyner is involved in this, funnily enough, but I think it's Meixner, I want to say, is the name of the researcher, a German-based team here. The paper's called Durability, Fatigability, Repeatability, and Resilience in Endurance Sports: Definitions, Distinctions, and Implications. So that's in the Journal of Applied Physiology. I'll do my best to get all the links and put that in the show notes if anyone is interested in checking these papers out. But essentially, again, it's looking at endurance sports as a whole. So it's thinking about marathons, triathlon, cycling, stage cycling. The terms are, like I said, you've got durability, fatigability, repeatability, and resilience. The ones that I guess are most poignant to ultras would be like durability and resilience. I think resilience is probably the big one here. But again, if we can't even settle on a definition of what it is that we're trying to talk about, that makes it even harder to create consistent, repeatable, researched topics. What are we actually tying down? So just for a definition that these guys have provided for durability is the deterioration in physiological characteristics over time during prolonged exercise. So that is going to be definitely a factor in ultramarathons. And resilience, the capacity to maintain or regain physiological and mechanical function under conditions of fatigue, environmental extremes, or other perturbations. So, when you've got those environmental factors, one thing that I don't think it really touched on there was like the psychological factors as well as a part of resiliency. And that's a massive part. And that's not to detract saying that like there's no psychology involved in anything that's like sub ultra. That's sport in general. That's part of the human condition is our inner monologue and the things that we do and don't say to ourselves to be able to perform at our best. But then there's the cognitive and decision-making aspects that come with like sleep deprivation when you're going into multi-days and things like that. So it becomes difficult, as I keep echoing, when we don't have this solid definition of what it is that we're trying to measure. Repeatability probably isn't as big a factor. You can't really talk about it in terms of ultra running. Repeatability would be like stage racing in cycling. I guess if you've got sort of like multi-day events, I guess repeatability to a certain degree in a microcosm would be relevant in a backyard ultra, because there are those forced bouts of rest. So that is something that I'm only just sort of considering up until now. But yeah, it's really difficult when you're only looking at the physiological side of things. And how do you then, even if we do decide on measures, like how do you measure like mental resilience? Like what things are we putting in place to see what personality traits are these individuals coming from? And that's something that I haven't really seen put across or even tried to be obtained. Are we taking personality quizzes in some of our best athletes across the world? What upbringings are they having? I'm sure there's some sort of influence that they're having based on their age and stuff like that. And it'll be interesting to see, what that mental resilience piece looks like in years to come. You know, we're seeing all the effects of social media on younger generations, their attention spans. Like, are they even going to have a thirst for pushing themselves in these spaces? It's going to be really, really fascinating. And again, that's where I sort of take that personal responsibility to put it out there and implore people to challenge themselves in the world of ultra. Because as I'll get onto now, the whole complete versus compete. If we want the sport of ultra to grow, we need more people doing it, because eventually those of us that are doing it will die. So if we are not fostering in fans of the sport and those that are going to be the next generation, even if they're not the best, like I froth watching the best because I then get to apply what they are doing at the top to my own training and put it into my own context, layer it on top of my own values, my own abilities, my own limitations, all those sorts of things. And the power of story in ultra is huge. It cannot be underestimated. And the fact that we have social media, we're able to share these things, YouTube, documentaries on all these things, I know it can get fatiguing and it does seem bastardized, and those that are purists that love to run without data, they're not tracking nutrition, it's simply for the love of the game, it's the adventure, it's the call to spirit, it's like, why can't we get back to that? I understand that totally, and I love trails for that. You know, there's no better feeling than sort of just letting the headphones out, taking in everything that's around you. But also we do at the same time have to have an acceptance that, well, we can't expect younger generations to live exactly as we do, because they're not growing up in a world that is the same as what ours was. So the power of story is going to be the way that we motivate these people to take part in the sport. And I think it's awesome that we're seeing someone as young as Hans Troyer at the top of ultra. And I wonder how much of the science will shift about what we do and know simply because younger athletes are taking part in ultra. Just by that virtue alone. Typically we're seeing people peak in ultras at around 37, whereas, you know, for the road marathon itself, it's like 30. So the fact that it's naturally built in to older generations, I wonder if that's just by proxy of the age of the sport and the interest. And all of a sudden you're having these younger kids that are motivated by people that are already in it right now. And they think, oh shit, what if I just transferred a little bit earlier? You know, what if we do have a whole load of like collegiate marathon runners that are sort of stuck in the crosshairs of, I don't think I'm going to make it as one of the world's best marathoners, but I'm still fucking an amazing runner. What if I just went to trail? And if we continue to grow the sport, get the sponsorships to convince them to chase that dream and to prioritize trail running, then I think that is a net positive for the sport. And that's how we continue to foster that love and that growth. And then it's going to inspire people to just get out there and have a go. So what is the difference between compete and complete? Realistically, I think most people with the complete mindset are probably going to be first timers, not necessarily to ultras full stop, but probably that race distance. And if it's your first time tackling that, it's probably more answering the question of, can I get this done? Like, can I just keep moving for this given amount of time? I don't have to push here. And in reflection, that was definitely what my first 100-mile experience was. And although I ended up going a lot quicker than I thought I would, I think I had factored in maybe taking 30 to 32 hours, and I came in just under 26 hours for my first 100-mile. Whereas you then look at my approach to Cape, and it was a lot more aggressive. I was aiming to get under 24 hours, but then even the way that I started the race was faster than that, to be honest. And I'll get to that towards the end with where my reflections are and why I think that may have led to me DNFing. So I think complete is sort of just your gateway entry into new said distance, because you don't want to go and ruin that experience by being too greedy, I think is a fair way to say it. But if you're looking to compete, maybe you already come from that background, and it's a natural progression to compete for that. You feel like you could actually win these events, but then also compete is performing to the best of your own ability. And I feel like that evolution has definitely come sort of full circle for me. Like I've got the confidence now. For ultras, you're essentially trying to increase your floor. Whereas for marathons, road marathons, you're trying to increase your ceiling. So again, it comes back to, let's just use the word fatigue resistance. I like it better. Whereas, the ceiling, you're trying to push up your VO2 max. Like how close can you sit towards your red line and run that razor's edge before you fall over the top? Whereas, ultras, it's a lot more sort of like LT1, like barely, you're sort of really pushing zone 2 and zone 3 right up against each other. It's a lot more manageable, but you're doing that at scale. And I think when you start to do that, it's really easy to run above what that capacity is, because you're used to doing it in such a compressed time that even if you did push a little bit too hard in, say, like even a 3 or 4, 5 hour long run, even if you got those intensities slightly wrong, it's not really going to affect you too much, as far as being able to actually run at all. Whereas in a race context, like you take that out to 5 or 6 hours and you've sat above that for that long, you might be able to suffer, and then that's finished. But that finish then becomes your DNF. So compete, I still think is rather a relative term. And it's something that develops as you, I guess, earn the right, for lack of a better term. Once you stack up these experience points, you then know where to push and pull and what you're willing to work towards. And if you're in this state of complete, you can focus a lot on sort of just time on feet, building out volume. You don't have to include that much speed all that often. But if you then want to sort of push your limits and actually see what you're capable of in that race distance and flirt with the idea of DNFing, then you are going to be trying to address the ceiling. So using a lot more of sort of like marathon based approaches, although not running like true VO2 max sessions, it's going to be a lot more sort of threshold stuff. And then, you're trying to pick up your fatigue resistance in the sense of running faster on your descents. So being able to expose yourself to those high eccentric loads. And that's where like my training ethos with strength training comes into the fray. So strength training becomes a lot more of a consideration as far as a training tool to help you become a better trail and ultra marathon runner, as opposed to a traditional road running marathoner. So there are all these little nuances between compete versus complete that I did want to address, because I also don't want people to think that not approaching something with a competitive mindset warrants a medal or a trophy. Like, I was definitely trying to push myself out there, and the other people out on course were a motivating factor and an influencing factor on me pushing. So I guess now that I've moved beyond that definition of compete versus complete, I'll wrap things up by sort of giving my summation on I think where I've actually landed with my experience at Cape to Cape. Having gone back and looked at some of the heart rate data, I hadn't bothered to look at it, to be honest. I was sort of just trying not to pay too much attention to everything. But now if I'm taking consideration into what lessons you actually have to take away, and initially I'd spoken about my gut playing up, and I'd never had that issue before. Spoken at length to my wife Miles, and we felt I should have stayed at the 55 or 54k aid station at Contos for an extended period of time to let my gut settle, then be able to get some fuel on board and then get going again. A little bit, I guess as more time goes on, I'm getting more and more disappointed with the fact that I did DNF. But again, I don't think we could have really done anything other than stop. But in reflection, the emotional state that I was in at the 54k mark, I can see why Miles was so eager to push me back out on course. And she said that's why she wanted to get me out, that it wasn't really something that was on her mind, that, hey, we could just stay here for a good amount of time, hopefully get your gut to settle and then get solids on. It was more about getting moving and getting out of that psychological state, which definitely helped. Like having the support of someone there and someone taking that, I guess, weakness in you at the time and just channel it into like why you're here. It's like, just get out. You just never know when it turns. Worst case, we're here to love you. We're going to pick you up at the next thing. Like, you're not going to die. But again, getting back to that, I'm not going to die. I was already so far ahead on time, even at that stage. I was right on track for 24 hours, a little bit quicker. And I was sort of doing the math as you do. You're trying to bank, like, okay, well, counting in fatigue, like, am I still on pace? So then you're sort of worried about trying to bank time early, front loading that energy. But I think I just cooked myself a little bit more than what I thought I did. You know, running down on the beach there, it doesn't sound like much because it sounds weird because we live here in Queensland where it is humid. It wasn't, and way hotter than what WA experiences, but it was only 20 degrees on race day. But I think that having that light coming off the beach, coming off the sand, the smell of all the seaweed that was on the shorelines after all the storms the previous week, there was just so much like sensory overload that I think it was masking just how hard I actually was pushing, sort of yo-yoing with other runners on the beach, trying to sort of play a bit of catch up here and there. And I think by the time I'd sort of got off that first 8K beach section and started a bit of a climb, hadn't really factored in just how hard I was working. And I think that probably stems from a lot of the sort of harder, more intense sessions that I've been exposing myself to this year because of everything that was required of me at Noosa in the 50K and what I was able to produce as a race result there, coming in, you know, just under 5 hours. I was really, really proud of the speed and fitness that I developed to be able to push on a flatter course for that long. But I think having that confidence and being used to moving that fast also, I guess, deluded me a little bit from a perceived notion. You know, when it comes to races, I don't really go looking at my watch and looking at heart rate and stuff that much. And, you know, I do remember at one point looking down and sort of seeing like 170, but it's sort of like, you know, like it's just the race excitement. It's a bit of adrenaline, like it'll settle. And I felt comfortable doing what I was doing. I was taking in like so much of the environment, the new coastlines, the sunrise after we've been running in the dark for the first hour. There was so much that was going into it that, yeah, I think I just got swept up a little bit, to be honest, and was probably just pushing too hard for, you know, a couple of hours. And that is going to come back to haunt you. So I think the gut shutting down ended up being a symptom rather than a cause. So I think that core body temp probably shot up more than I realized. And then, you know, it being a little bit drier, like I said, not the humidity from Queensland, potentially should have been taking on more fluid than I was because I got all the fuel down. I was getting in close to 90 grams. I think just a little over 90 grams an hour for those first few hours. And then it all sort of fell apart. So that leads me to my next thought process, which is the Scenic Rim, 100 miles, the first year they're going to be running it. It's, I think, only less than 9 weeks away now. It's like the 8th of August. So what are we now? The 22nd of July. June. I've been going back and forth about what to do here. And again, asking myself those questions like, what is my why? Why am I doing this? I want to make sure that I'm enjoying the process and not getting swept up in things. But for me personally, and what I want to achieve in the sport and the experiences that I want to have, you need a lot of race experience continually to be able to qualify for a lot of these events. And you need to accumulate 100-mile completions. So unfortunately, my first 100-miler was completely self-run. Like I had an event cancelled, got together with my wife and friends, created our own course, got out and done it. Still an amazing experience, still counts, I've still run it, but, and it's completely fair because there are people that use fuckery out there that would do so to get an edge and not be truthful. And I completely agree with race organisers wanting official results. So I'm yet to have an official result now. All I've got officially is an official DNF. So I want to try and rectify that so that it opens some doors for me next year. I haven't really put too much thought. I sort of keep them to myself about races that I'm thinking about challenging myself with next year. But if I don't get something done now, that's within, and the beauty of Scenic Rim is it's only an hour away from where I am. So if I don't get this done now, there's nothing locally that's really afforded to me in the 100-mile realm for the rest of the year. Because there's a couple of backyards, but a lot of these events don't include backyards now because there's a bit of a divide coming about what it means to prepare for a backyard versus a true trail ultra and stuff like that. So I don't really have the ability to do another interstate race this year, just with raising a young family, finances, all that sort of stuff that I'm sure you guys are well and truly aware of as well at the moment. And yeah, I think it's just an opportunity, and I guess it's a bit of a penance, to pay to experience these things. And I think that is a positive way to look at it. But also I want to go and put into use the lessons that I think I've learned from the Cape now. And it's an opportunity that's presented itself. I still have my health. That's the best part that comes from that DNF. It's not like I broke myself, as disappointing as it is, that I think I could have rectified it, problem solved some things a bit better, so that I wouldn't have to be in a position to potentially race again this year if I didn't want to, not at that 100-mile plus distance anyway. So I think I'm probably 90% committed. I got through a nice threshold treadmill incline session this morning. It's sort of a David and Megan Roach special. So 8 by 5 minutes with 90 seconds rest at threshold pace. And I wanted to quit at like five intervals in. And it was something that I was like, we cannot reinforce this negative tap out early mindset. Like, you just have to, let's just get back to that singular focus. And I remember there was that point during the race when I looked down, it was like 44, 45 Ks. And I was like, how are you going to 4X this distance in the state that you're in? And I really felt a moment of vulnerability and weakness there that eventually I succumbed to. I got very emotional, obviously, once I got to that aid station, like I said. But this morning I felt was a really, I guess, condensed version of being able to tell that part of my brain, that part of my personality, I guess, to politely shut the fuck up and get away. And I was really, really proud, again, even though I was in just such a microcosm. It's a workout that takes barely over an hour to get done, to get through that and perform quite well. So I feel good, I feel fit. They're the things that I'm sort of leaning into, and again, asking myself that question of what if? Like, what if I can just get this done? What if I can rectify these things quite quickly? And it was just, something that I could have changed voluntarily. Just go a little bit slower, dude. It's all good. We've got so much time. Run your own race, get into it. There's nowhere to be, it's good. Like, let's just problem solve on the go. Let's just break it down. Don't go looking too far in advance. And I think sometimes, you get caught looking too far in advance in these ultras, and it becomes a detriment to your psychology and your emotional state, most definitely. So anyway, I think we'll wrap things up there for this week. Again, I love sharing all these thoughts, these feelings, but then also, some research stuff and questions that I have about where we go and where we take the sport. And if you've got any interest, like I said, I'll put some of those links to some papers that I've sort of been reading the last couple of days. But again, it probably leads to, like, I guess good science leads to more questions than it does necessarily answers for the 100-mile and beyond. And I think, we can all have a very important role on where the sport goes and continue to share what we're doing so that we can make the most of our training right now. Because realistically, if you're waiting for the science, it's probably not going to serve you in your running career. Like, everything that comes out is for the next generation ultimately. So I think we need to take some personal responsibility there in sharing those practices, trying to find what it is that we can define so that we can research it in a somewhat controlled and repeatable setting, so that we can create some concrete methodologies for performing in these ultra marathons, these multi-days, all these things. It's as difficult of a challenge as I think it's going to be. I think we can slowly get closer and closer to what it is. And in worst case, we are just sharing these methodologies as coaches, as runners, whatever label you want to put on it. So as always, have a wonderful week. I'm always more than happy to field questions in DMs. I love going back and forth about this stuff. If you are enjoying these podcasts, please subscribe. Please share it with a friend. It does make a difference to the, algo. Yuck. Hate that word, but it does. It does make a difference if you are actually subscribed and you're getting the notifications for these things. So it makes a difference, absolutely. So enjoy the rest of your week, and I'll see you next week.